On his 18th birthday, a boy aged out of the state system and was told he had inherited a single, worthless piece of land. But what he found sealed beneath that land would change his life and the story of his family forever. If you've ever felt like you were starting over with nothing, then this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button and stick around, because we're going to talk about what it means to build a home from scratch. The final morning at Northwood Group Home for Boys tasted like stale air and disinfectant. It was a taste I had known for 6 years, 2 months, and 11 days. I'd counted. Every sunrise was a mark on a calendar I kept only in my head. Today, the calendar ran out of pages. I was 18. Legally, I was an adult. Functionally, I was just baggage waiting on a curb. My entire life fit into a single black garbage bag and a worn-out backpack. The bag held clothes that never quite fit, a couple of paperback books with cracked spines, and a small, framed picture of a smiling woman I barely remembered, my mother. The backpack held my file, a stack of papers that told the official story of Leo Vance. It was thick with reports, assessments, and transitions. It was heavy, and it wasn't even my story. It was the story of what had been done to me. I stood in the hallway, the linoleum cool beneath my thin socks. The fluorescent lights hummed their endless, monotonous song. It was the soundtrack of my childhood, that low, electric buzz. I could still feel it in my teeth. Down the hall, younger kids were starting their morning routines, the sounds of doors opening, muffled arguments, the smell of burnt toast beginning to creep from the kitchen. It was a world that was, in one single tick of the clock at midnight, no longer mine. The door to the director's office was closed. I was supposed to knock at precisely 8 a.m. My watch, a cheap digital one I'd gotten for my 16th birthday, read 7:59. I waited for the final minute to bleed away. There was a certain institutional comfort in following rules, even on the day you were being kicked out for being too old for them. It was the only structure I knew. Waiting for permission, waiting for the bell, waiting for the next meal, the next bed check, the next form to be signed. The numbers on my watch flipped. 8 o'clock. I raised my hand and knocked twice, a firm, polite rap. Not too loud, not too soft. The kind of knock that said, "I'm here, as requested, and I will not be a problem." The door opened almost immediately. Mr. Henderson stood there, holding a manila folder. He wasn't the director, but a county social worker assigned to what they called transitional youth. It was a fancy term for kids like me, the ones aging out with nowhere to go. He was a man made of tired angles and beige clothing, his face a roadmap of other people's crises. But his eyes were usually kind, if distant, like he was looking at you from the other end of a very long tunnel. "Leo," he said, stepping back. "Come in. Happy birthday." The words sounded practiced, automatic. He'd probably said them to a dozen other kids this year. The office was exactly as I remembered it from every other mandatory meeting. A metal desk, 2 uncomfortable plastic chairs, a dying plant in the corner that someone occasionally remembered to water. It was a room designed to be forgotten. I sat, placing my backpack carefully by my feet. The garbage bag I left by the door, a silent declaration that I was on my way out. Mr. Henderson sat opposite me, the desk a barrier between his world of paperwork and my world of uncertainty. He opened the folder. "So, Leo, 18. It's a big day." I nodded, saying nothing. What was there to say? It was a day. The bigness of it felt like a weight, not a celebration. "We've got over the options," he continued, his voice droning on with the familiar script. "The transitional housing has a 6-month waiting list. I've put you on it. I have a voucher here for a week at a motel downtown, and a list of employment resources." He slid a few stapled packets across the desk. They looked thin and flimsy, like they could blow away with a single sigh. This was it. The parting gift for surviving the system. A week in a place that probably smelled like bleach and regret, and a list of minimum wage jobs that would barely cover the rent if I ever got off the waiting list. I took the papers. My hand was steady. I had promised myself I wouldn't shake. I wouldn't cry. I wouldn't show them anything. Showing them something was a weakness, a reason to write another note in the file. Subject exhibits emotional distress, poor coping mechanisms. I had learned to be a ghost in my own life. It was safer that way. "Thank you," I said. The words felt like swallowing sand. He looked at me, and for a second, the professional mask slipped. A flicker of something, pity maybe, or just exhaustion, crossed his face. "It's not much, I know," he said, his voice a little softer. "The system, it is what it is." He sighed and looked back down at his folder, as if the papers held a better answer than he did. He shuffled through them, and then he stopped. He pulled out a single, thick envelope, sealed with a strip of yellowing tape. It looked ancient compared to the crisp white government forms. "There is one other thing," he said, his brow furrowed in confusion. "This is unusual. It's been in your file since you came into care. Instructions were very specific, to be given to you on your 18th birthday, not before." He slid the envelope across the desk. It landed with a soft, heavy thud. It wasn't paper. It was my name, Leo Vance, written in a spidery, unfamiliar script on the front. No return address, just my name. I stared at it. In all my years of being a file, a case number, a problem to be managed, I had never been given something personal, something that wasn't a form or a report. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Mr. Henderson shrugged, pushing his glasses up his nose. "Legally, it's an inheritance from your maternal grandfather, Arthur Vance. According to the notes, he was your guardian for a short time after your mother passed, before he disappeared." I remembered the name, but not the man. A ghost from a story I was too young to understand. The file said he'd abandoned me. That was the official word. Abandonment. Another label stapled to my identity. "I don't understand," I said. "He left. The file says so." "It does," Mr. Henderson conceded. "But before he did, he filed this with a lawyer. A simple will. It leaves you his only asset." "It's not much, Leo. I have to be honest with you. By all accounts, it's a worthless piece of property out in the middle of nowhere. Unincorporated county land up in the mountains. No structures listed, no utilities, just 5 acres of rocks and trees, and a tax bill which, according to this, has been paid in advance for the next 20 years by an anonymous trust." He let that sink in. A worthless patch of dirt. My inheritance. It was almost funny. A joke from a ghost. I picked up the envelope. It was heavy. I could feel something hard inside, something that slid around. A key, maybe. "The local authorities consider the property abandoned," Mr. Henderson added, his voice taking on a cautionary tone. "There are letters in your file from a development corporation, Phoenix Holdings. They've been trying to buy the land for years as part of a larger resort project. They say it's the last private parcel they need. Their offers are substantial. Apparently, the location is more valuable to them than the land itself." He slid another, more modern-looking business envelope toward me. It was from Phoenix Holdings, addressed to the county on my behalf. "That's their latest offer. It's enough to set you up. An apartment, a car, a real start. Most kids who walk out of here would kill for that kind of opportunity." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "My advice? Take the money, Leo. Sell it. Don't even go out there. It's nothing but wilderness and bad memories. Take the clean break. Start your life." His advice was practical. It was sensible. It was the smart play. Sell the ghost's land to the faceless company. Take the money and run. Create a new story, a better one. But my fingers were tracing the old, faded ink of my name on the thick envelope. This was the only thing anyone had ever left me. Not the state, not the system. A person. My grandfather. The man who had abandoned me. Why would a man who was going to abandon his grandson leave him anything at all? It didn't make sense. The file had a story, but this envelope, this heavy, mysterious object, it felt like it held a different one. I looked up at Mr. Henderson. His face was full of well-meaning, bureaucratic certainty. He saw a problem kid and an easy solution. A checkmark in a box, case closed. Subject achieved financial stability. He didn't see the question burning in my gut. He didn't see the flicker of a feeling I hadn't had in a long, long time. Not hope exactly, not yet, but something close. Curiosity. I tucked the developer's letter into my backpack, unopened. But the thick envelope from my grandfather, I held on to that. I held it tight. I need a bus ticket, I said. Mr. Henderson blinked. A bus ticket? To where? The motel is downtown. No, I said, my voice clearer than it had been all morning. I need a bus ticket to a town called Silver Creek. He frowned, shuffling through the papers. Silver Creek? That's a 4-hour ride into the mountains. There's nothing there. It's the closest stop to that property. I nodded. I know. He sighed, a long, weary sound. Leo, I'm advising you against this. Strongly. There's no support for you out there. No resources. There are no resources for me here either, I said, the truth of it sharp and clean. Here I have a week. Maybe there I have 5 acres. It wasn't much of a plan. It wasn't a plan at all. It was just a pull. A magnetic north I didn't understand, pointing me away from the life I knew and toward a patch of dirt I'd never seen. He looked at me for a long moment, and I think he finally understood that he was talking to a wall. He saw the set of my jaw. He saw that for the first time, I wasn't waiting for permission. I was making a choice. He sighed again, but this time it was a sigh of resignation. He reached into his desk, pulled out a book of vouchers, and began to write. The bus groaned its way out of the city, a mechanical sigh of relief as the gray concrete skyline gave way to sprawling suburbs, and then finally, to the open, rolling green of the countryside. I sat by a grimy window, the vibrations of the engine a low thrum against my skull. The thick envelope from my grandfather was on my lap. I hadn't opened it yet. It felt too important to open on a bus, surrounded by the quiet desperation of strangers. It was a secret, and it needed silence. My reflection in the dirty glass was a pale, translucent ghost superimposed over the passing fields. A boy with tired eyes and a haircut that screamed state issued. For the first time, I was truly, completely alone. The feeling was equal parts terrifying and exhilarating. At Northwood, there was no such thing as alone. You were always watched, always monitored, always part of a group. Your time was not your own. Your space was not your own. Your thoughts were the only thing they couldn't catalog, and even those felt crowded out by the noise and the rules. Now, there was just the hum of the road and the vast, indifferent landscape. The farther we drove, the more the world changed. The flat plains buckled and rose, becoming foothills covered in a thick blanket of pine and fir. The sky seemed to get bigger, a deeper shade of blue than I'd ever seen in the city, where it was always hazy and washed out. The bus made stops in a series of small towns, each one a collection of a few dusty streets, a gas station, and a diner. People got on and off, their faces weathered by sun and work, their conversations quiet and clipped. They glanced at me, a city kid with a garbage bag for luggage, and then looked away. I was an outsider here, a piece that didn't fit, which was fine. I'd been a piece that didn't fit my whole life. I was used to it. After what felt like an eternity, the driver called out, "Silver Creek! Next stop, Silver Creek!" My stomach tightened. This was it. The bus hissed to a stop in front of a one-story building with a faded sign that read, "General Store." There was no station, no depot, just a wooden bench and a patch of gravel on the side of a two-lane road. I grabbed my bag and my backpack and shuffled down the aisle, avoiding eye contact. I stepped off the bus and into a wall of silence. The engine roared back to life, and the bus pulled away, leaving me in a cloud of diesel fumes and quiet. When the smoke cleared, the silence that was left was absolute. It was a living thing, broken only by the whisper of wind in the tall pines that crowded the edge of the road. The town of Silver Creek wasn't much of a town at all. It was the general store, a post office the size of a shed, and a handful of houses scattered among the trees. I looked at the map Mr. Henderson had printed for me. It was a crude satellite image with a red circle drawn around a patch of green. "Vance property," it said. A handwritten note at the bottom read, "Approximately 3 miles east of town. Follow Old Mill Road." I looked east. The road stretched out, disappearing into the dense forest. 3 miles. It didn't sound like much, but with a garbage bag slung over my shoulder and a life's worth of uncertainty in my gut, it felt like 100. I decided to start at the store. Maybe I could get better directions, or at least a bottle of water. The bell above the door chimed a cheerful, rusty note as I walked in. The inside smelled of sawdust, coffee, and something sweet, like cinnamon. It was crammed with everything from canned goods and hardware to fishing lures and flannel shirts. An old man with a magnificent white beard sat on a stool behind the counter, reading a newspaper. He looked up over his spectacles as I approached, his eyes sharp and curious. "Help you?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "I'm looking for a piece of land," I said, my voice sounding thin in the quiet store. "The old Vance property." The man's eyebrows shot up. He put his paper down and leaned forward, studying me. "Vance, you say? Haven't heard that name in years. Not since old Arthur lit out." He squinted at me. "You kin?" "His grandson," I said. "Leo." The man's face softened slightly. "Well, I'll be. I'm Bill. I run this place. Knew your granddad. A strange bird, Arthur. Kept to himself, but a good man. The whole town was shocked when he left you." There it was again. Left me. The official story. "Yeah," I said, not wanting to get into it. "I was just told I inherited his land. I'm trying to find it." Bill grunted, pointing a thick finger out the window. "Old Mill Road, just like it sounds. Follow it till it turns to dirt. Then you got another mile or so." "You can't miss the gate, or what's left of it. But son, there's nothing out there. Hasn't been for years. The woods have taken it back. He'd be better off selling it to those phoenix vultures that keep sniffing around." Everyone had the same advice. Sell. Take the money. It was starting to feel less like advice and more like a warning. "I just want to see it first," I said. He shrugged. "Your business. You'll need water, and a good flashlight if you plan on being out there past dusk. It gets dark in these woods. Real dark." I bought a gallon of water and the heaviest flashlight he had. As I paid, he looked at me again, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Your granddad," he said slowly. "He wasn't the kind of man to just leave something behind without a reason. Whatever you're looking for out there, I hope you find it." His words stuck with me as I walked out of the store and started down Old Mill Road. He wasn't the kind of man to just leave something behind. But he had. He'd left me. And he'd left this land. Maybe they were connected. Maybe finding one would help me understand the other. The walk was longer than I expected. The paved road quickly turned to a gravel track and then to a rutted dirt path that was slowly being reclaimed by the forest. The trees grew closer, their branches interlocking overhead, creating a green tunnel. The air grew cooler, smelling of damp earth and pine needles. It was beautiful, but it was also intimidating. The silence was deeper here, the only sounds the crunch of my boots on the dirt and the frantic beat of my own heart. I was starting to think Mr. Henderson and Bill were right. What was I doing out here? I was a city kid. I knew how to navigate concrete mazes and crowded buses, not this wild, untamed green. Just as a knot of panic began to tighten in my chest, I saw it. To the left of the path, almost completely swallowed by overgrown ivy and thorny bushes, were two massive stone posts. Between them hung a rusted iron gate, bent and broken, hanging from a single hinge. This was it. I pushed my way through the brush. A faded wooden sign, riddled with moss, was nailed to one of the posts. The letters were barely visible, but I could make them out. Vance. I was here. I stepped past the broken gate and onto the property. My property. The word felt foreign, absurd. The land sloped gently uphill from the road, a chaotic tangle of weeds, young trees, and fallen logs. There was no house, no cabin, not even the foundation of one. Just 5 acres of wilderness. It was exactly as they'd described it. Worthless. My heart sank. I had chased a ghost story into the middle of nowhere, and this was the punchline. A joke at my expense. I dropped the garbage bag in my backpack, suddenly exhausted. I sank down onto a moss-covered log, the dampness seeping through my jeans. What now? Go back to town? Beg Bill for a job sweeping floors? Call Mr. Henderson and admit he was right? Take the developer's money and pretend this place never existed? I sat there for a long time, watching the light filter through the canopy of leaves, listening to the woods breathe around me. And then I saw it. It was something out of place, not a natural shape. About 50 yards up the slope, partially hidden by a cluster of ferns, was a flat, gray surface. It wasn't rock. It was too smooth, too perfect. It was concrete. My curiosity, which had been beaten down by disappointment, stirred again. I got up and started walking toward it, my boots sinking into the soft soil. The closer I got, the more I could see. It was a large, rectangular slab of concrete, about 20 feet wide and 10 feet tall, set directly into the hillside. It looked less like a part of a building and more like a dam or a wall. And in the center of it was a door. A door made of thick, heavy steel, painted a dull gray that had begun to flake and rust around the edges. There was no handle, no knob, just a keyhole and a large, wheel-like valve, like something you'd see on a submarine hatch. A bunker. It was a bunker. My grandfather hadn't just owned 5 acres of woods. He had built a fortress. Suddenly, the envelope in my pocket felt 100 pounds heavier. I pulled it out, my hands shaking now, for real this time. I tore open the seal. Inside, there were 2 things. A single, heavy, old-fashioned iron key, and a thick stack of folded papers. Letters. I took the key. It was cold and solid in my palm. It looked like it belonged to a castle or a prison. With a deep breath, I walked up to the steel door. The keyhole was stiff with rust and disuse. I had to work the key in, jiggling it back and forth until it finally slid all the way home. I turned it. There was a loud, grating clunk from deep within the door, a sound of heavy tumblers falling into place. The sound echoed in the silent woods. But the door didn't open. The wheel. I grabbed the valve with both hands. It was cold and unyielding. I threw all my weight into it, my muscles straining. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a groan of protesting metal, it began to turn. It was incredibly difficult, each inch a victory. I spun it until it wouldn't turn any further. And then, with a deep hiss, like a long-held breath being released, the seal broke. The heavy steel door moved inward just an inch. Darkness lay beyond it. A cool, musty smell, the scent of trapped air and time, washed over me. It smelled like a tomb. I fumbled in my backpack for the flashlight I'd bought from Bill. I switched it on. The beam cut a bright, lonely circle in the darkness. I pushed the door open wider and stepped across the threshold. I was in. The beam of my flashlight played over the walls of a small concrete entryway. Directly ahead was another heavy steel door, this one with a simple lever handle. To the right, a set of switches on the wall. I flicked the top one. Nothing. The second, nothing. But when I flicked the third, a low hum started up from somewhere deep inside, and a single, bare bulb flickered to life overhead, casting a weak, yellow glow. Power. After all these years, there was still power. A generator, maybe, or a battery system. The light was dim, but it was enough. I could see that the air was thick with dust motes dancing in the yellow light. The second door opened easily. I stepped through and found myself at the top of a narrow concrete staircase leading down. The air was even cooler here, and the silence was absolute. The sounds of the forest were gone, sealed out. Down here, the only sound was my own breathing, which suddenly seemed very loud. I descended the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the confined space. At the bottom, I found myself in a single, large room. It was bigger than I expected, maybe 30 feet by 40 feet. It wasn't a damp, empty hole in the ground. It was a home. Or it had been. Along one wall was a simple kitchen area, a small propane stove, a sink with a hand pump, and shelves stocked with canned goods. Dust-covered cans of beans, soup, and vegetables, their labels faded with age. In the center of the room was a sturdy wooden table and 2 chairs. A bed, neatly made with a simple wool blanket, was tucked into one corner. In another corner was a desk, and next to it, a wall of shelves, floor to ceiling, packed with books. It was a place built for survival, but also for living. It was Spartan, but it was orderly, cared for. This wasn't the hideout of a man who had simply run away. This was the sanctuary of a man who was planning to stay. A man who was waiting for something, or hiding from something. My flashlight beam found the desk. On its surface, clear of the thin layer of dust that covered everything else, was a single object. A small, wooden box with a tarnished brass latch. It looked like it had been placed there yesterday. I walked over to it, my boots making no sound on the smooth concrete floor. I reached out and touched the lid. My fingers came away clean. This box had been waiting for me. I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was the stack of letters from the envelope. And something else. A small, leather-bound journal. I picked up the first letter. The paper was thick and creamy. The handwriting was the same spidery script from the envelope. It was dated 20 years ago, to the week my grandfather had disappeared. It began, "My dearest Leo." I sat down at the dusty table, the single bulb overhead casting long shadows around the room. The silence was so complete, it felt like a pressure against my eardrums. I unfolded the first letter, my hands trembling slightly. The paper was thick, and the ink was a faded blue, but the handwriting was clear and strong. "My dearest Leo," it began. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are a man. I hope the world has been kinder to you than I was able to be. I hope you have grown up strong and good. I have so much to explain, and I fear I have so little time on this paper to do it. Words feel like a poor substitute for a lifetime of conversation we never had. First, you must understand that I did not want to leave you. Every instinct in me screamed to stay, to hold you, to protect you. But the greatest protection I could offer you was my absence. It is the great, terrible irony of my life. I had to stop and read that line again. The greatest protection I could offer you was my absence. The words didn't compute. They were the opposite of everything I had ever been told. The file, the social workers, the whispers at the group home, they all said one thing: abandonment. A selfish act. But this letter, it spoke of protection, of sacrifice. I felt a knot of anger and confusion tighten in my chest. This was a lie. It had to be a lie to make an old man feel better about running away. I almost crumpled the paper in my fist. But I didn't. I had to know. I had to read his version of the story. I smoothed the letter out on the table and continued reading. Our family, Leo, was not a simple one. Your mother, my beautiful, brilliant daughter, got involved with people she shouldn't have. She was an investigative journalist, a firebrand who believed in speaking truth to power. She was working on a story about a powerful corporation, Phoenix Holdings. The same company that, I am sure, is still trying to buy this land. She found proof of their corruption, illegal dumping of toxic waste, bribery of government officials, things that could destroy them. They found out about her investigation. They threatened her. They tried to silence her. But she was stubborn. She was brave. Too brave. The letter shook in my hand. My mother. The smiling woman in the photograph. I knew she was a journalist. The file said she died in a car accident. A tragic, random event. But this letter painted a different picture. It wasn't an accident. The night she died, Leo, was no accident. They ran her off the road. They made it look like a drunk driving incident. The police report was clean. The case was closed. They have money, and they have influence. They can make any story true. I was her only family left, and you were just a baby. You became my whole world. But they knew she had passed her research to me. They came after me, too. They made it clear they would do anything to get that evidence back. And they made it clear that they saw you as leverage. I had to close my eyes. My heart was hammering against my ribs. Phoenix Holdings, the name from Mr. Henderson's office. The company with the substantial offer. They weren't just developers. They were murderers. My mother's murderers. And my grandfather, he had been protecting me from them. I knew I couldn't keep you with me, the letter continued. As long as I was your guardian, you were a target. They would have used you to get to me, and to the evidence. So I made the hardest decision of my life. I built this place, this sanctuary, a place to keep the truth safe. And then, I had to make myself disappear. I arranged for you to be taken into the state system. I made it look like I had abandoned you, a broken old man who couldn't handle the grief. It was a convincing story. It was the only story that would keep you safe. By disowning you in the eyes of the world, I severed the link between you and them. You became just another orphan, lost in the system, invisible. And as long as you were invisible, you were safe. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. It came out as a ragged sob. The story of my life, the one that had been my shame for so long, the abandoned child, the unwanted burden, it was all a lie. A carefully constructed shield. The 6 years, 2 months, and 11 days in Northwood. The loneliness, the feeling of being forgotten. It hadn't been a punishment. It had been a protection. He hadn't thrown me away. He had hidden me. I cried then. For the first time since I was a little kid, I put my head down on that cold, dusty table and I cried. I cried for the mother I never knew, the brave woman who died for the truth. I cried for the grandfather I had hated for abandoning me, the man who had sacrificed everything, even his own name, to keep me alive. And I cried for the lonely boy who had carried a story that was never his, a weight of shame that belonged to someone else. After a long time, I sat up, wiping my face on my sleeve. There were more letters. I read them one by one, late into the night, the single bulb overhead my only companion. He told me about the land. It had been in our family for generations. It was worthless to most, but priceless to him. He told me about the bunker. He had built it himself over the course of a year, in secret, after my mother died. It was self-sufficient. There was a deep well under the floor with a hand pump for water. A ventilation system that drew air from a hidden pipe on the hill. A propane generator with enough fuel to last for months. And the canned food, he wrote, would be good for 30 years. He had prepared for everything. In another letter, he explained the money. The trust that paid the property taxes was also meant for me. He had sold everything he owned and invested it, setting it up so that on my 18th birthday, I would gain access. The details were with the same lawyer who had held the will. It wasn't a fortune, he wrote, but it was enough. Enough for college. Enough to start a life. Enough for a choice. And that was what it all came down to. The choice. The final letter was shorter than the rest. Leo, in the wooden box with these letters, you will find my journal. It contains all of your mother's research, every note, every contact, every piece of evidence she gathered against Phoenix Holdings. It is the truth she died for. The world thinks I disappeared, and the evidence is gone. That is why you have been safe. But now, you are a man, and the choice is yours. You can take the money from the trust and walk away, disappear like I did, live a quiet life. No one would blame you. Or you can bring the truth to light. But know this, if you do, they will come for you. They will not hesitate. This bunker is the only place you will be safe. The land is the one thing they cannot simply take. They must buy it. As long as you own it, you have leverage. The second option is a dangerous path. It is a life of fighting. It is the life your mother chose. I do not know which path you will take. I only wanted to make sure you had the choice. Whatever you decide, know that I loved you. Know that every day of my exile was spent thinking of you. Be brave, my boy. Be good. Your grandfather, Arthur. I sat back, the letters spread out on the table like a map of a life I had never known. The weight of it all was crushing. The truth was so much bigger, so much more terrifying and beautiful than the simple, sad story I had always believed. My grandfather wasn't a coward. He was a hero, and my mother? She was more than just a smiling picture. She was a warrior. And they had left me her sword. I opened the wooden box again and took out the journal. It was a simple, black-covered notebook, but it felt heavier than anything I had ever held. I opened it. The pages were filled with my mother's handwriting, tight, neat, and urgent. Names, dates, chemical formulas, account numbers. A detailed record of a vast and dangerous conspiracy. This was the truth. This was the bomb my grandfather had been sitting on for 2 decades. And now it was mine. I thought about the letter from Phoenix Holdings in my backpack, the substantial offer. Blood money. They wanted to buy my silence. They wanted to pave over my family's land, to bury the truth under a golf course or a luxury spa. They wanted to erase the story of what they had done. I felt a surge of rage so pure and so hot, it almost made me dizzy. It burned away the years of fear and numbness, the practiced invisibility. For my entire life, I had been a passive object, a file being passed from one desk to another. My story had been written for me by other people, by the system, by them. Now, for the first time, I held the pen. I looked around the bunker. This wasn't a tomb. It was an armory. It was a legacy. The books on the shelves, the food on the shelves, the solid concrete walls. It was all a gift, a chance. My grandfather had given me more than 5 acres of worthless land. He had given me a foundation. He had given me a home. And he had given me a mission. The choice he wrote about wasn't a choice at all. How could I walk away? How could I let my mother's death be for nothing? How could I let them win? I couldn't. It wasn't in my blood. I am the son of Eleanor Vance. I am the grandson of Arthur Vance, and this is my land. My fight. I stood up and walked over to my backpack. I pulled out the crisp white envelope from Phoenix Holdings. I didn't even open it. I didn't care how many zeros were on their check. I walked over to the small propane stove, turned the knob, and lit it with a match I found in a drawer. A small blue flame hissed to life. I held the corner of the envelope to the flame. It caught immediately, curling and blackening, the logo of the phoenix turning to ash. I watched it burn until it was nothing but a fragile, black skeleton of paper, and then I let it drop into the metal sink, where it crumbled into dust. It was a small act, a symbolic one, but it felt like the most important thing I had ever done. It was a declaration of war. My war. And now, I just want to pause for a moment and speak directly to you. If you've made it this far, thank you. This part of the story, the moment of revelation, it's always the hardest, isn't it? When the story you've been telling yourself about your own life turns out to be wrong. When you find out that what you thought was abandonment was actually protection, or what you thought was a weakness was actually a source of strength. It's a powerful, disorienting moment. Have you ever had a moment like that? A moment where the whole world shifted under your feet. If you feel comfortable, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. This channel, this community, it's built for people like us. People who have had to find the real story. Your story matters. And if what I'm saying is resonating with you, if you believe in second chances and fighting for the truth, please consider subscribing. It means the world to me. It tells me I'm not alone in this fight. Now let's get back to what happened next. Because burning that letter wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The next few days were a blur of work and discovery. I explored every inch of the bunker, my new home. It was a marvel of careful planning. My grandfather had thought of everything. There were manuals for the generator, for the water pump, for the ventilation system. There were spare parts, tools, and first aid supplies. He had left me a fortress, but also a guide on how to command it. The wall of books wasn't just for entertainment. There were books on law, on botany, on electrical engineering, on history and philosophy. It was a curriculum, a homeschool for a life he knew would be difficult. He was teaching me, even in his absence. And there was food. So much food. I spent an entire day taking inventory. It was like being the sole inhabitant of a grocery store. I wouldn't starve. That was a new feeling for me. The absence of hunger, of worrying where the next meal would come from. It was a quiet, profound luxury. But my most important discovery came on the third day. Tucked away at the back of a shelf, behind a row of Tolstoy and Dickens, was a small, locked metal cash box. There was no key. I used a crowbar from the tool chest to pry it open. Inside, bundled in neat stacks and wrapped in oilcloth, was cash. A lot of it. Tens of thousands of dollars. A note on top read, simply, "For the things a trust fund can't buy. For emergencies. For life." This was the money he'd kept off the books, untraceable. It was another layer of protection, another tool for the fight. My first act as the new master of the Vance property was to walk back into town. When I walked into Bill's general store, he looked up from his newspaper and a slow grin spread across his face. "Well, look what the cat dragged in. I was wondering if the woods had swallowed you whole. You don't look like you've been swallowed." "Not yet," I said. And for the first time, the words didn't feel like a lie. I felt solid, rooted. "I'm staying," I told him. "I need supplies." Over the next hour, I bought everything I could think of to make the bunker more of a home. A new pillow, fresh blankets, soap, a toothbrush, coffee, bread, eggs, the simple, mundane things. As Bill rang me up, he eyed my purchases. "Staying, huh? That land hasn't had a soul on it in 20 years. You sure about that, son?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I said. The conviction in my own voice surprised me. He nodded slowly, as if he was seeing me for the first time. Not as some lost kid, but as something else. "Your granddad would be proud," he said quietly. He loved that piece of land. Said it was the only honest thing he owned. On my way out, I stopped at the tiny post office. I used some of the cash from the box to buy a book of stamps and a box of envelopes. Then I went back to the bunker, to the desk where my mother's journal lay waiting. I spent the next week immersed in her work. I read her journal from cover to cover, then I read it again. I cross-referenced her notes with the books on law my grandfather had left. I began to understand the scale of what she had uncovered, the web of deceit Phoenix Holdings had woven. It was bigger than just one illegal dump site. It was a pattern of corruption that spanned decades and had poisoned communities all up and down the coast. It was a monster, and my mother had tried to slay it. The journal was the sword, but a sword is useless if you don't know how to wield it. I needed a plan. I couldn't just walk into a newspaper office and hand it over. Phoenix would bury it. They would discredit me, paint me as a troubled, delinquent orphan with a grudge. I needed to be smarter. I needed to use the tools my grandfather had given me. My first move was to contact the lawyer my grandfather had mentioned. His name was Elias Thorne, and his office was in the city. I found his number in a folder of legal documents Arthur had left. I walked back to the general store to use the payphone outside. I didn't want to use my own cell, assuming it could be tracked. Paranoia was now a survival trait. A woman with a crisp, professional voice answered. "Thorne & Associates?" "I'd like to speak with Mr. Thorne," I said. "It's regarding the estate of Arthur Vance." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "One moment, please." A few seconds later, a deep, calm voice came on. "This is Elias Thorne. To whom am I speaking?" "My name is Leo Vance," I said. "I'm Arthur's grandson." There was another pause, longer this time. I could hear the faint sound of papers shuffling. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice now laced with a strange mixture of caution and wonder. "I've been waiting for your call for 20 years. I am so very glad to hear your voice. Your grandfather, he would be too." We spoke for over an hour. I told him I was at the property. I told him I had found the letters and the journal. He listened patiently, his silence a comforting presence on the other end of the line. When I was done, he said, "Your grandfather was a very wise, very brave man, Leo. He set up a formidable defense for you. The trust is yours, effective on your birthday. The property is ironclad in your name, and Phoenix Holdings has no legal standing to force a sale." "They keep sending offers," I said. "Their latest one was in my county file." "Ignore them," Thorne said firmly. "They are trying to intimidate you. It's their primary tactic. But they are vulnerable. Your mother's research, if it is what Arthur claimed it was, it could be the end of them." He told me what to do next. He would begin the legal process of activating the trust. He advised me not to engage with Phoenix directly. He told me to sit tight, stay safe, and study the material. He said, "Knowledge is your shield, Leo. Your mother and grandfather gave you the truth. Now you must make it your own." I hung up the phone, feeling a sense of clarity I had never experienced before. I had a purpose. I had allies. I went back to the bunker and got to work. My days fell into a rhythm. In the mornings, I would work on the land. I bought a scythe and an axe in town and began the slow, arduous process of clearing the brush away from the entrance to the bunker. It was backbreaking work, but I loved it. With every swing of the scythe, I felt like I was reclaiming not just the land, but a piece of myself. I was no longer a passive ward of the state. I was a steward of this land, my land. I was strong. I could feel the muscles in my back and shoulders hardening, the calluses forming on my hands. I was becoming a part of this place. In the afternoons and evenings, I worked at the desk. I bought a laptop and a small satellite internet dish in a town a few hours away, paying with cash. I used the internet to digitize my mother's research, creating multiple encrypted backups stored on different drives, which I hid throughout the bunker. I began to research the names in her journal, to follow the money trails, to see what had happened in the 20 years since she had written those notes. Many of the corporate officers were still with the company, now in senior positions. The patterns of corruption she had identified were still there, just hidden under new layers of shell corporations and legal jargon. The monster had only grown bigger. One afternoon, about a month after I had arrived, a sleek black car I didn't recognize rolled slowly down Old Mill Road and stopped at my gate. I watched from the cover of the trees, my heart pounding. A man in an expensive suit got out. He was holding a briefcase. He looked at the overgrown property, a look of distaste on his face. He didn't come onto the land. He just stood there for a moment, then taped a business card and a thick envelope to the gatepost before getting back in his car and driving away. I waited until he was long gone before I went to retrieve it. The card was simple. Marcus Thorne, Vice President of Acquisitions, Phoenix Holdings. Not the lawyer, a different Thorne, a bitter coincidence. The envelope contained a new offer. It was double the previous one, a staggering amount of money, enough to make you forget who you were. There was a handwritten note clipped to it. Mr. Vance, we know you're there. Let's be reasonable. This is a life-changing sum of money. Call me. It wasn't an offer. It was a threat. We know you're there. They were done being patient. The pressure was on. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the desk, my mother's journal open in front of me, the developer's offer lying next to it. The two sides of my choice laid bare, the easy path and the right one. My grandfather had told me the choice was mine. He had given me an out. I could take that money and disappear. I could live a comfortable life, free from all this. But as I looked at my mother's determined handwriting, I knew I couldn't. Her story had become my story. Her fight was now my fight. To walk away would be the real abandonment. The next morning I took their letter. I didn't burn this one. I put it in a new envelope. Inside, I included a single sheet of paper on which I had typed one sentence. This land is not for sale. I didn't sign it. I walked into town and mailed it to the corporate headquarters of Phoenix Holdings. The declaration of war was no longer symbolic. It was in the mail. Life settled into a new kind of normal. The work, the research, the quiet solitude. I made weekly trips to town for supplies and a bit of human contact. I got to know Bill at the store. He never asked about the bunker, never asked what I was doing out there. He just treated me with a quiet respect that felt more valuable than any conversation. I met other locals too. A woman named Maria who ran the small diner, a retired logger named Gus who taught me how to properly sharpen an axe. They were reserved but kind. They were a community, something I'd never had. They didn't know my story, but they saw a young man working hard and trying to make a go of it, and that was enough for them. One day, Mr. Thorne, the lawyer, called me at the payphone. The trust was active. The money was in an account in my name. I was, on paper, wealthy. It felt strange, unreal. The money wasn't the point, but it was a tool, a powerful one. What now? I asked him. Now, he said, his voice grim. "We prepare for the storm. Phoenix will not take no for an answer. They will escalate." He was right. A week later, the official letter started. Legal notices from a high-powered law firm in the city. They claimed squatters' rights on behalf of the county. They claimed the property was a public nuisance. They tried to bury me in paperwork, to bleed me dry with legal fees. But my grandfather had prepared for this. Elias Thorne was one of the best lawyers in the state, and his services were paid for by the trust. He batted away their legal challenges one by one. They were throwing spaghetti at the wall, trying to see what would stick. Nothing did. My ownership was absolute. When the legal attacks failed, they turned to intimidation. Surveyors would show up at the edge of my property, driving stakes into the ground just outside my boundary line. Drones would occasionally fly overhead, buzzing like angry mechanical insects. The black car with the man in the suit would park at my gate for hours at a time, just watching. They were trying to make me feel exposed, to make me feel scared. And it worked. I was scared. Every night, I would lock the heavy steel door of the bunker, my heart racing at every strange sound from the woods. I felt like a soldier in a trench, waiting for an attack that could come at any moment. During this time, I leaned heavily on my mother's journal. It became my Bible. Her courage, her relentless pursuit of the truth, it gave me strength. I wasn't just fighting for a piece of land anymore. I was fighting for her memory, for the justice she was denied. I decided it was time to stop playing defense. It was time to use the sword she had given me. I put together a package. I compiled the most damning evidence from her journal. The chemical analysis of the soil samples from the illegal dump site, the recorded conversations with whistleblowers, the copies of the internal memos she had obtained. I wrote a cover letter, telling her story, and my story. I made a dozen copies. I mailed them to every major newspaper in the state, to every environmental protection agency, and to a handful of independent journalists I had researched online. Journalists who had a reputation for taking on powerful corporations. I sent the packages from different post offices in different towns, using cash to pay for the postage. I covered my tracks. And then, I went back to my bunker, and I waited. For a week, there was nothing but silence. I began to fear that it had been for nothing. That, just like 20 years ago, Phoenix's influence was too great. That the story would be buried. I was sitting at my desk, staring at the wall, a pit of despair opening in my stomach, when my satellite internet connection pinged with a news alert. It was a small, independent news blog from the coast. The headline was explosive. Phoenix Holdings accused of decades-long toxic waste cover-up. Whistleblower evidence surfaces. My heart stopped. I clicked the link. The article was a bombshell. It laid out the whole story using the documents I had sent. It quoted my mother's notes. It named names. It was all there. Within hours, the story was picked up by a larger news outlet. Then another. By the end of the day, it was the lead story on the evening news. My mother's name, Eleanor Vance, was everywhere. They called her a hero, a journalist who had died trying to expose the truth. Her story, buried for 20 years, was finally being told. The storm had broken, and I was in the eye of it. The aftermath was swift and brutal. The stock price of Phoenix Holdings plummeted. The state attorney general launched a full-scale investigation. The corporate officers whose names were in my mother's journal were subpoenaed. There were arrests. There were resignations. The monster was finally being wounded. They knew it came from me. The intimidation stopped. The black car disappeared from my gate. The drones were gone. They were too busy fighting for their own survival to worry about a boy on a hill. They had lost. My mother had won. A few weeks later, Elias Thorne called me. "It's over, Leo," he said, and I could hear the relief in his voice. They're broken. They'll be tied up in litigation for the next decade. You're safe. The words hung in the air. You're safe. It was a feeling I had never truly known. I walked out of the bunker and up the hill to the highest point on my land. The sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and purple. I looked out over the endless sea of trees, the quiet valley, the town of Silver Creek nestled in the distance. This was my home, not just the bunker, but all of it. The trees, the rocks, the quiet. I had fought for it. I had earned it. I thought about my grandfather, Arthur. I hoped that somehow, somewhere, he knew that his sacrifice had meant something, that his plan had worked. He had given me more than just safety and money. He had given me a chance to reclaim my family's name, to finish my mother's work. He had given me a purpose. In the end, the inheritance wasn't the land, or the bunker, or the money. It was the story, the true story, and the strength to be its author. And so, my life began. Not at 18, when I walked out of the group home with a garbage bag, but here, on this land, under this wide open sky. I'm still here. I'm clearing the rest of the land, slowly, carefully. I'm planning to build a small cabin near the top of the hill, a place with windows where I can see the sunrise. The bunker will always be here, a reminder of where I came from, a testament to the love of a man I barely knew. It's not a tomb or a hideout anymore. It's a foundation. My foundation. The story of my family taught me that a home isn't just a roof over your head. It's the ground beneath your feet. It's the history that you carry. And sometimes, the most valuable thing you can inherit is a fight worth finishing. It's a second chance. And that's a lesson I want to share with all of you. No matter what story you've been told about yourself, no matter how lost or forgotten you might feel, you have the power to write a new chapter. You can find your own piece of ground to stand on, and you can fight for it. Thank you for listening to my story. If it moved you, if it gave you a little bit of hope, please subscribe and become part of this community. Share your own story of inheritance in the comments below. Not about money or property, but about the values, the struggles, and the strength that has been passed down to you. I read every single one, because every story matters, and you are not alone.